Looked at numbers 1 through 3 of my practice sheet where we did a price floor on a good I like to call it. Now we're going to, for numbers 4, 5, and 6, we're going to repeat back what we've looked at already, basically, except in the form of a price ceiling on the good I like to call that. So the first thing we need to do is set up our model, something that we really cannot practice doing enough, because that really helps you to understand it, is to just just memorize it by doing it over and over again, because supply and demand is going to keep coming our way really for the rest of the semester. So the more we do it, the better we'll be at it, and the more comfortable we'll be for the rest of the semester. So I'm setting up my framework here, and I'll hold it up in just a second. And I'm looking at a good I like to call that. So hopefully you have a framework set up, looks something like that for that. Right? And of course now we're going to have a price ceiling imposed. Now to get the price ceiling imposed, maybe it's worthwhile to think about like why we would be imposing a price ceiling. The reason to impose a price ceiling is the belief that the current price is too high and we don't want it to go above some ceiling, right? We need to stop it from going as high as it's going by nature. And the ceiling is indeed up. A lot of people, when they draw these, because I've seen it many times, will draw ceilings up here because that's up, but that wouldn't stop the price from going to where nature is taking the price. If you drew a price ceiling up here, nature only takes it to there anyway, so it wouldn't be binding. It wouldn't do anything if it was way up there. So if we're drawing a binding price ceiling, which is what I'm implying in the question, I didn't say the word binding. I've actually found that by doing that, it just kind of raises confusion on the front end, believe it or not. So if we're going to draw a price ceiling that's going to matter, the price ceiling that's going to matter must be drawn below the equilibrium price. So let me get it drawn and I'll try to explain that. So what we're saying is this price, P star in blue, is unfair. It's too high. We're having the government step in to try to do something about that by setting a price that's not as high as it is, right? Well, isn't that what these numbers are below it? These are the numbers that are not as high as it is. So the ceiling that's stopping the price from going up to where it wants to by nature is below the equilibrium, if it's to matter. If you drew it up here, then what you drew is a non-binding price ceiling, which can occur, and the effects of that are really nothing because the market price is going to remain here. So for this to matter, for it to be a binding price ceiling, it should look like this. And now the dotted line is just kind of a placeholder there. It's just showing us that across the graph for that particular value, for that particular price, the seller's behavior is right here. This, by behavior, what I mean is this is the quantity that sellers are willing and able to sell at that price. So now I'll draw a dotted line just down to the horizontal axis just to indicate if this were numbered, what that number would be. It would be there because it's directly below the supply curve at that price. Well, at that price, the consumers are willing and able to purchase this much. That's what the demand curve tells us. So my quantity demanded is measured for that right along the horizontal axis. So it's there. So that's the quantity demanded versus the quantity supplied, whereas at equilibrium, the quantity demanded was equal to the quantity supplied. Now they're separated because we're off of the equilibrium price, and only at the equilibrium price was quantity demanded equal to quantity supplied. So what we have here is excess demand. It's the one that's greater. So we have excess demand, and this time, unlike when we explored getting back to equilibrium in a free market, this time this excess demand is here to stay with us. So it has a particular name. It's called a shortage. The market is short of what is desired by that much. This is what's desired at that market or that price ceiling price, and this is what's actually made at that price ceiling price is the quantity supplied. And so in that really covers the graph as far as the work that needs to go into the graph. But then in number 5, I ask what effects we might see from this. Okay, so you might say this is an effect, but it leads to other things. So the first thing that this implies, just to have a shortage, is that people want something that's not there. So in one way or another, lines are going to form. It could be in the form of putting your name on a list or something like that, but that's still forming a line. So the first thing that we might expect to see as a possible trade-off is that lines or queuing develops. And then that might lead to other things. And of course, I'm saying might because I don't know what that is. It depends on what that is. It also depends on what regulators, the government officials, are going to do about this. This is something to expect. How it plays out just depends. These are the possibilities. So since we have lines, people are standing around or they have their name on lists to get it, well, then it becomes very tempting for someone to perhaps do the waiting in line for someone else for a fee, or to get the thing because they have access to it that others don't, and then sell it at a higher price. So the lines sort of very naturally might lead to other outcomes which themselves are not fair. And recall, this is being done in the name of fairness. Okay, so if you're buying it and reselling it at a higher price, that's against the law because this was a law saying the maximum the price could be. So that's by definition a black market. If you're trading favors to get access to it, to give someone else access to it, or you're picking who is going to get access to it because it treats you well to have some people have access to it but not others, things like that. These might be things that are unethical behaviors. And the government is aware of this because this has been tried. I'll circle back to that. And so they might impose some kind of a plan to try to mitigate these problems. And one thing that's been done that has some merit to it, that could work, but requires its own set of own oversight and its own costs to administer such a program, would be a form of lottery. That costs money to administer that, and I gave you my personal example very vaguely, where that's not always run very fairly either, and it requires monitoring or oversight of some way to make sure that that's not happening, which has its own costs. Specifically, that's going to end up meaning most likely taxes to pay people to monitor things to make sure that they're being run the way they're supposed to be run in the name of fairness. And then in the last piece that I covered, separate from the first video I did on our price ceiling, the shortage in some cases may lead to yet another trade-off that we could anticipate occurring, and that was in the specific case of, now I'm getting into number 6, rent controls. That's where this has happened before, where because there's a line of people or a list of people waiting to get the good, the people who have access to the good might not be treated all that well. Because, after all, if they don't like the way they're being treated, somebody else is waiting right behind them. Go on. Come on up. You're next. And they'll be happy to be there because they've been waiting in line. So what that means, or what I'm trying to make a little bit interesting as a descriptor for this, is a qualitative decline. Customer service is likely pretty poor when only this many people are getting it, but this many people are wanting it. Because why invest resources into making good customer service when there's a whole line of people waiting for it? So effectively, that's qualitative decline. So that's about all I can say about that. Hope it's been a little bit interesting, and I hope it's really feeling pretty comfortable at this point.